Welcome, coaches, to Wisdom on Wednesdays. I am Jeff Jordan. This is episode 4. I want to continue the discussion on building team unity through suffering. The suffering I'm talking about is in the off season. It is from March until November. And I am convinced if you want to build true team unity, that you have to suffer with your team and make them suffer. And when we really look at that word suffering in the sport of wrestling, I'm convinced some wrestlers hate it. Other wrestlers embrace it, and a smaller few even love suffering. And I'm convinced the guys that embrace suffering and that love suffering, those guys are going to take your team to the promised land. In my opinion, however, the guys that hate or fear suffering, they're never going to get out of the sport of wrestling what they want. I love to make my team suffer, and I love for my team to suffer for me. Again, I want to stress, this is crucial, there is a difference between building team unity and building true team unity. Building team unity is taking your team to a movie, whitewater rafting, playing laser tag, going camping for the weekend. Those activities, honestly, I've done a few of those in the past with my wrestlers, but to me, those activities, they don't win you state titles. In my opinion, I wanted to build true team unity, and the only way I knew how to do that was for me and my team to suffer. One suffering workout that I would like to talk about is called the bike race. This workout we would do every Friday after lifting weights in the off season. In the spring, we did like eight workouts, and then we would also do the same thing in the fall. We would do it after every Friday for 8 weeks after lifting on Friday. But anyway, this workout would take 45 minutes to an hour. It was a 12-mile bike race. We would start at my mailbox. We would go a lap around the block, 6 miles, turn around, and head back the other half of the bike workout. So it was a 12-mile bike workout, and it absolutely crushed my coaches and my team. Now, when talking about, before I get into the bike race, I really want to reiterate this. This is not, and I repeat, not a fun, joyous ride. Guys didn't ride together. We didn't laugh. We didn't giggle. This was a flat-out do-or-die race that I wanted to see who would dig deep to try to win the race, as well as who would try to beat their personal best time. But it was definitely brutal. We would do the race again after lifting, and when I finished the race, I would drop my bike on the road. I'd lay in the grass and moan and try to cheer on the wrestlers as they were finishing. And I had two thoughts and two emotions that would run through my head. Number one, the first emotion was, I'm going to try to find an excuse not to do this race next week because it was that brutal. The second thought, though, of course, was I can't wait to do this race with my team next week, just to put ourselves through this pain. I had two rules for the race. Number one, you got to finish the race. Number two, you can't miss a race. If one of the wrestlers missed a race, unless it was a dire emergency, he was kicked out from doing the rest of the races that spring and couldn't join again until the fall. And you know what? My wrestlers never missed. The second rule is you have to finish the race. And kind of funny, we would have chains fall off bikes by downshifting, and guys would have to flip their bike over, try to get the chain back on. We had one time at the start of the race, we had a 4-bike crash pile up where guys had to finish the race with bloody hands and bloody knees, but we always finished the race. One time, one of my former state champs, Matt Stevens, Matt and I were both tied for second. My son Bo was way ahead of us, and we're riding on who's going to get second. We had a mile to go. Both of us were dying, and I have no idea why, but Matt Stevens all of a sudden goes off in the ditch in the grass and wipes out. I didn't stop. I just kept right on going. I looked back a couple hundred yards, and Matt's tire was completely bent in half, his front tire. He's got the bike over his shoulders. He's trying to run to the finish line. But the good thing is I beat him that day. Going back to the race, we would have 3 lines of 8 to 10 people, and I would start the clock and I'd yell go. And here's how the race went. The first 200 yards was a downhill, and then the first hill we hit on Neff Road was absolutely brutal. It was a half-mile climb, very, very steep, and when you got to the top of the hill, you had lung burn like no tomorrow. And we all know what lung burn is. I don't care how good a shape you were in, you had lung burn. The second thing is you had so much lactic acid built up in your legs, and the only thought was going through your head is, how am I going to finish another 11 and a half miles? You go to spit, and you got spit touching the road, and it's still hanging from your lips. That's how much lung burn you had. You know what my guys did? They lowered their head, and they kept pedaling. The next 2.5 miles, 3 miles, you have a straightaway and one downhill, and then you turn on a road called Nettle Creek Road. And it was a slight incline. Of course, you're going into the wind every time. Slight incline for about 2.5 to 3 miles. And at the end of that incline, the next thing you know, you got a 3/4 of a mile hill that literally crushed you. Next thing you know, we'd have bikes lined up, wrestlers lined up a mile. You know, we always had a little cluster, 2 or 3 in the lead, and then they extended for the next half mile to a mile. After this hill, this brutal hill, my guys called it Mount Everest. Some of my guys said they thought that the devil himself made that hill just for us to die on. The second lap, we'd always at the top of that hill, we could tell what our wrestlers had for lunch that day at school. But once you make the turn at the halfway point, I am convinced no wrestler would do this workout on their own. The only reason why they're doing it is because the rest of the team's doing it. And you know, once you make the turn, you put your head down, you got 6 more miles to go. As you go back down, you're flying down Mount Everest, and then the next thing you know, the last hill is about 2 miles from the house. And it's only about a 300 or 400 yard hill, but it is straight up and it's got a turn to it. This is what would drive me crazy every time. My oldest son, Bo, never lost a bike race. This is where he'd make his breakaway, and sure enough, I would always either get second or third. And once we finished, wrestlers would just drop their bike, fall in the grass, and they would sit there and groan and moan. We'd have parents that come over and watch the race to try to cheer their sons on in the race. Why? Because they just knew how bad it crushed us. We would do it rain or shine. One time we did the course and it started torrential downpouring, and I got to the halfway point. My wrestlers are looking. Is Coach Jordan going to go ahead and turn around and do it? I turned around. You know what? The rest of the team never said a word. They made the turn. We finished the race soaking wet. We quit the race back about 6 years ago or 7 years ago because one of my wrestlers pulled out kind of close to a car, and the car honked. The driver of that car was the editor to our local newspaper. She writes an article 3 days later that says, a highly recognizable coach in the community has his athletes do a bike race, and they're not being careful. The next thing you know, my athletic director calls me, Coach Cups. He's a great basketball coach, called me and said, Coach, did you see the paper today? We're not allowed to do the bike race anymore. In fact, Coach Cups would have 4 of his 5 starters do the bike race with us. I think he said no to the bike race because he didn't want to do it anymore. No, Coach Cups always supported us in everything. I still do the bike race today. It's completely brutal. I did it 3 days ago with me and my boys, and Bo still smashed me as well, and Mickey caught me with a half a mile to go, and of course he beat me as well. So, but you know what? I still hate it, but I also love it. And bike races or workouts like this is what builds, in my book, true team unity. Why? The whole team suffers. They're doing it for a cause, and it pulls them together. I still have wrestlers today that says, Coach, remember we used to do that crazy bike workout? It was absolutely brutal on us. But you know what? It's built a lot of lifelong memories as well as friendships. Coaches, I hope you liked the episode, the bike race. Next week, we're going to change topics, and just want to say stay safe, keep training hard, and remember, Noah didn't wait for a ship to come in. He built one.